million. Now, normally those sort of numbers are reserved for the hypercar world, and thankfully that is nothing to do with the price of this car. No, that's to do with how many development kilometers Audi put on the RSQ8 before releasing it to market. 1.2 million development kilometers. As a spot of context, and we all know we like a spot of context around here, that's the same distance of driving from Earth to the moon and back twice. So needless to say, they've put some time and effort into this car. It's not just a case of stick in a bigger engine and off you go. Now, 18,000 of those 1.2 million kilometers were on the Nurburgring. The significance of which, that this RSQ8, which I conveniently find myself in today, is now the fastest production SUV ever made around the Nurburgring. That's no small statement. When you think about the platform of this car, the torque and the power. Yes, 7 minutes and 42 seconds around the Nurburgring. That's not bad for a half decent sports car. Never mind a best part of 2.4 tons SUV. It's absolutely ridiculous. Now, I'll go into how Audi achieved that shortly, but let's just give you a little bit of an overview of the foundation of this car before going into further dynamic requirements. So, in a weird way, and I don't want to summarize this in the first 2.5 minutes, but you can kind of think of this as an RS6 on stilts. I actually mentioned that when I did the very first look of this car in LA just a few weeks ago. And that's not to do this or the RS6 a disservice. In fact, the RS6 is one of the most complete packages that I've ever driven. Certainly in terms of a car which ticks the performance box and the practicality box. There's not many cars which combine those two platforms. However, this has added an extra box, which is of course the off-road box. And that is confirmed if you dig down into the drive select modes down here. There is literally an off-road mode. It's not just because the ride height is higher. There is a configured setting which is specifically designed to operate off-road. So you now have 3 cars in one with this car. However, let's forget the practicality for a moment and all that jazz. Let's see how much of an RS the RSQ8 really is. So I conveniently find myself on, and I'm not just saying this is truly one of the greatest driving areas that I've ever had the pleasure of driving. I am the side of a volcano in Tenerife. This is a hidden gem. The tarmac, the asphalt is glass smooth. It feels brand new. I came here 3 years ago for another car launch, and my association with this place is basically cheap holidays, if I'm completely blunt. Never in a million years did I expect to unearth such driving nirvana, and today we're back on this windy stretch of gloriously perfect asphalt. Yeah, 17 degrees, just right, enough to get a little bit of temperature in these tires and find out what this car is really all about. So, on the steering wheel down here, we have the new RS mode button, where you're able to configure 2 custom settings. So press 1 for RS1, press 2 for RS2. You can allocate your own settings to those. So if you want to quickly toggle between your personal preference of perhaps comfort and sport, and then just go double tap from RS1 to RS2 and make it comfortable, and then smash it back to RS1 again, and you can pre-configure that in these settings to make the whole thing get taut, on its toes, agile and lively. That's what I'm in right now. We're on the best stretch of this road. Let's see what RSQ8's all about. So here we go. This is the bit where I talk about the relationship between the engine and the gearbox. Same gearbox as in the RS6, which I'm not sure if you caught my review of that car, is the weakest point of the car. They've opted for the 8-speed, more conventional torque converter automatic. Once again, you know what's funny about these launches is you do find yourselves on effectively some of the greatest driving roads in the world. And yet 90% of the ownership of cars like this, you're never going to get to a road like this. Now, what I will say is, if you do find yourselves on roads like this regularly, and you're buying an RS product for what an RS does best, which is dynamic driving, I think the gearbox is going to do your head in. Now, when it was the C7 platform and that era and that generation of car, you know, that torque converter auto felt pretty good then. Like, by average standards, it was fairly snappy. But when you've got things like, you know, a Porsche Cayenne with a twin clutch box, and the way that that reacts so savagely quick, so dynamic and agile, and it changes gear exactly when you want it to, when you're in this and you're heavy on the brakes, and this for me is where it lets it down. You're scrubbing off pretty substantial speed because you've got 600 horsepower underneath your right foot and the car weighs over 2 tons. You're using these phenomenal carbon ceramic brakes, which is like throwing an anchor out into the tarmac, dragging you to standstill, and then you pull on that paddle, and all of a sudden everything that was just working so seamlessly gets let down by the gearbox. It's just fact, and I am really sad to say that, because every other element of this car is brilliant. And look, this is why it's important to say on roads like this, because if you're on a road like this, it's the only time that the gearbox flaws will highlight itself. Anywhere else in your daily driven world, it'll be totally fine. There is a redeeming factor, because if you put this into dynamic, don't put it into manual so you don't interact with the gears, and let the system, let the car get on and calibrate itself. It's definitely better when it does its own thing. The only problem is it kind of takes away the interaction of you getting involved with changing gears. So it really depends on how important that is to you or not. Turns out if you leave it in sport and let it get on with its own thing, it's pretty good. So from the outset, it does look like an entirely different car. So why do I refer to it as being like an RS6 on stilts? Well, that first of all, that engine, 4-litre, twin turbocharged V8, 600 horsepower, 800 Newton meters of torque. Now those figures are so familiar to me because I'm fresh off the back of the RS6 first drive out in Malibu, and it's exactly the same engine and figures for this car. It's also running the incredibly calibrated rear wheel steer. I cannot tell you, I cannot stress enough the level of contribution that brings to the dynamics of this car. It's just outstanding. Now, this is the first time that Audi have applied the RS DNA to the top of the Q series. So this being the Q8, as I mentioned a minute ago, it is top of the Q tree, but its defining feature, the defining feature of this car, is the calibration that they've done on the anti-roll system. Now this car weighs in at a similar amount. It is heavier than an RS6, but as a result the performance figures are pretty similar. 0 to 60 around about 3.7, 3.8 seconds. Launch control, rear wheel steer, 4-litre V8, 600 horsepower. It's all there. It's all basically transplanted, which is why I say it's somewhat of an RS6 on stilts. However, for me, the defining characteristic of this car is the calibration work that Audi have done on the anti-roll system. Of course, being an SUV, it rides higher than the RS6. Its center of gravity, therefore, is taller. This, truly, when you throw it into a corner, it sort of upsets your brain a little bit, because you're expecting some roll. There should be, by the rule of physics, there should be some body roll when sending this mass into a tight corner. And yet there isn't. And as a result, the way that it sits and settles into a corner, it's wizardry. It's very, very strange. And at first, it actually takes a little bit of getting used to, because your ride height and your perspective on the landscape as a result of riding higher is that of a conventional SUV. But when you turn it into that corner which you're approaching at this ride height, aware of this mass, it just doesn't move. I don't know. It's ridiculous. That now brings me around to the dynamic select switch down here. So on a conveniently placed haptic feedback button here on these touchscreens, I can toggle between the 8 different driving modes. But what is interesting is the comfort mode. Now, while this is the RS model, and by its very nature, you're probably buying into this breed of car because every now and again you find yourself on a great driving road, you want to grab the car by the scruff of its neck and thoroughly exploit it, of which we're approaching said road shortly, and I shall explain to you in great detail the dynamic depth and breadth of ability of this car. However, most of the time, this is a daily driver, and you're going to be using it in town and on your motorway commutes, and back where I live on your bumpy British B road. Surprisingly, what I have found in comfort mode, while yes, it does do a very good job of settling things down and making it more comfortable, I'm surprised that it isn't as smooth riding as the RS6, and I don't know why. Now, when I was in the RS6, I was blown away by the fact that it now runs an optional set of 23-inch alloys. That's the largest alloy wheel that Audi have ever fitted to a car ever. And on the inside of that is the largest carbon ceramic brakes, I think, on the production car market. They are a 10-cylinder carbon ceramic brake, 10-cylinder brake caliper. That is some serious stopping force. And so with that comes larger wheels in order to accommodate these huge carbon ceramic brakes. But what was amazing on the RS6 was the way that it ironed out the bumps in the road. One of the inherent offsets and compromises you typically have with larger wheels and therefore lower profile tires is the fact that you generally start to pick up on all of the little lumps and bumps in the road. RS6, for some reason, the witchcraft on that didn't apply. It just glided away. On this, weirdly, the ride quality and comfort isn't quite as sophisticated as in the RS6. Now, I'm not sure if that's because they've had to stiffen things a little bit more purely to deal with the matter of physics, but that's where these two cars differ slightly. And I am talking about the RS6 because on the outset, at least, these cars are so good, they're so familiar and in a weird way so similar that your choice of car, I think, literally comes down to your preference perhaps of ride height. I mean, the practicality of this car is pretty much the same. It's fundamentally a very similar car. It just offers more off-road capability. It offers greater ride height clearance. From an SUV perspective, the added ride height and your perspective of the world when you're in it, I like that from an SUV. So there we go. Questions and comments below. Let me know what you think about the RSQ8. Is it cool that they've done top of the range Q version as an RS car? Also, I have a feeling that I shall be spending a little bit more time in these cars in the future. So let me know in the questions and comments below what more you would like to see from the RSQ8. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. I shall see you next time. Ciao!